So welcome everybody to our December technical training meeting. Appreciate you joining us this morning. Here's the agenda for today's meeting. Is the date right? It's only the 6th. I think my date's wrong on
You're
that.
dumb.
That's all right.
We haven't attacked Pearl Harbor yet.
Cool. We have a pretty full agenda today, and a lot of it is in the new business. So I think that will end up taking up more than half of the meeting. But got a couple training opportunities we'll talk about, a bunch of new business items, and then the main topic for today, I wanted to do a little bit of an ASHRAE refresher, just talk about some of the ASHRAE issues that I've been seeing out there, and make sure we have some clear understanding on that stuff. But we'll get to that when we get there. I will kind of be moving through stuff fairly quickly, but please don't hesitate to stop and ask questions. We do have time for that. If we don't get to everything, you know, there are other methods to communicate some of this stuff if we need to. So if you are concerned about anything, please speak up as I'm moving through stuff. So the first item there on the agenda is a couple of training opportunities. We are going to hold our next EA/QCI training and certification on March 6th through the 9th. So if you are ready and need to get your BPI certification, this is that 4-day class where you come up and take the written test and the field exam. It's very resource intensive, so we limit it to 4 people at a time. I know there's about 8 or 9 people in the network right now that are actively working towards that certification. So what I typically do is I open up the registration, and it's the first 4 people to send me a letter get a seat. There is going to be one caveat to that, and that is coordinators. If you have anything going on within your agencies where you need somebody to get that certification as soon as possible so that you can maintain operations, reach out to me, and that would be the only time we would that I would not just follow this the first 4 to send me a letter rule. So I have talked to a couple coordinators. I think everybody's doing okay. I did receive 2 letters yesterday, so we're actually down to just 2 seats. So if you need this certification, get your stuff in right away. The next time we will offer this class will probably be in June or July, because I know there's folks that are getting ready, but it kind of depends on the feedback that I get from you guys and how many letters we end up getting for this first class. So anybody have any questions on that one? All right, next item is just a reminder that the Rocky Mountain something or other, the folks that offer the lead inspector class up at the U of U and Weber State offer a lead inspector class, and they offer lead renovator courses as well. I sent an email out last week that has a link. They posted their course schedule for next year, and registration is open. If you need your lead inspector, or if you need to renew your lead inspector, make sure that you don't miss that opportunity, because they're the only folks that we're aware of within the state of Utah that offer that class. As a reminder, if you're an energy auditor or a QCI, that lead inspector certification is now a requirement and a part of your job. So make sure that you're maintaining that. If you've recently gotten your EA certification and you have yet to take that class, the expectation is that you would be doing that this spring in order to maintain your validation on your EA certification. They do offer the renovator course. They're not the only game in town on the renovator course. There is another company that offers the renovator course. My personal opinion, I liked these guys did a better job with the renovator course. They only offer it 4 times. The other company offers it a lot more. So, you know, if you want a little better experience, see if one of their dates works. you have any questions on that one, let me know. Just a reminder, I sent out an email to this group last week, so you should have something in your inbox from me that will help you find information about that class.
Zach, you have a question?
Hey, I was just wondering, you guys said you need the lead inspector to be a QCI now?
Well, you need your EA to be a QCI, right?
Yeah, I guess that's true.
Lead inspector to be an EA.
All right, okay. I wasn't sure on that.
But chicken and egg.
But yeah, no, that's a good question.
You can't get there from here. Any other analogies we got?
All right, into the new business.
It's almost like somebody planned it that way. I don't know.
Slowly we got there, right? So I just wanted to thank all the coordinators and those who were involved in taking care of the badge reporting. And then I wanted to talk about what that's going to look like going forward. So if you're a retrofit installer technician or a crew leader, or there may be other roles within your agency if a coordinator wants you to do your badges. But those of you who are working on your badges, we just needed a way at the state to get a little more real-time data on which, how many iterations of each badge was being accomplished. And so we had to put together a report. That is a report that we need completed on a quarterly basis. And I'll just hope you don't mind. I'm going to pull up Bragg's report just because they're, at the top of the alphabet. But this is what the report looks like. It's in addition to the paper copy that each individual is keeping. So I'll pick on Alan. Alan, you will keep your paper copy of your badges and get them signed off as you go. And then quarterly, someone at your agency will need to just go through that, and they will be putting in the dates of all the iterations that you were able to complete during the quarter. I think everybody, that was pretty clear. Everybody did a great job of submitting that information. So we just did that last week, and that got us up to date for Q1, which really ended back in September. So since this is a quarterly report, the next time this is due would be at the end of this month. And I wanted to align the due date on this report with our BWRs. Since our BWRs are due on the last day of each month, this quarterly report will be due on the last day of each quarter. So coordinators, just make sure you've got someone assigned at your agency to make sure to complete this report on the last day of each, or by the last day of each quarter. We do want the information to be fairly timely, so they should not be starting on it too soon, but probably sometime in the last week of each quarter would be sufficient. Any questions on that? All right. Next item I had was, I just wanted to give you guys a minute to talk for amongst yourselves here. Does anybody have any updates on the ASHRAE tube XRFs? I know some of you are looking at purchasing them. There's been some discussion about maybe getting together and doing a bulk purchase. Anybody making progress there and want to share anything?
Where's Carrie Lynn?
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can kind of hear you, Carrie. We lost you.
She left the meeting.
Oh, we lost
Never
you.
mind.
Does anybody else have any updates on
She
what they're
didn't like
working
the
on?
spotlight being on her. Couldn't handle the pressure.
Maybe I'll skip this for a minute. When Carrie Lynn comes back, we'll come back to it in a minute. Next item was something Brad wanted to talk about. And I just made a note here about policy is your process.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So was in Minneapolis last month, this month, whatever month. I don't know. I went to Minneapolis for a conference. Oh, now I'm echoing. This is weird. Oh, whoever fixed it. Nope. Oh, they didn't. Anyway. Nope. So DOE, Inspector General's office. All right. What are we doing here? All right. Who's causing this problem?
Sorry, guys, we got some weird echo.
I don't like hearing myself 3 times. It's hard enough hearing myself once.
Now
All right.
We can kind of hear
Okay.
you, but you're still cutting in and out, Carrie Lynn.
Oh, sorry. I'm
That's
trying to do too many things at one time. So I've talked to our executive board and our executive director, and they've given us permission if we want to do a bulk order. And a couple of agencies have said that they were working on it, but they did request just a letter of approval from their director and their agency saying how many they want and that they're okay and that they'll be able to reimburse us.
So your board is okay with you making a purchase on behalf of a couple of other agencies as long as you've got a letter from their directors saying that they will reimburse it. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And then have you had any communication with the supplier? Is any discount worth that extra effort, I guess?
So we haven't talked to the supplier. I should have asked Brad when him and I were talking yesterday. So we have the approval for us to buy, but I didn't have a hard number, so I didn't know if it was worth talking to them about that before we knew exactly how many we were thinking about as a bulk.
Okay.
So we need to set a deadline for anybody that's interested in being part of a bulk procurement on the new XRF guns to commit to you with a letter. Bottom line.
So kind of like, and if the other agencies, like, I don't know, like who they need to talk to or what that time frame for them would look like. Does anybody have any feedback or thoughts on that?
I know we'll probably end up getting one, Carrie Lynn.
Okay.
I'm sure we're gonna get one too.
What kind of time frame would you guys need to get a letter from your executive director or from your board to make that commitment to have Carrie Lynn purchase it in your behalf?
For us, it's just mostly my decision. So I think we're gonna just go ahead and grab one.
All right. Are you gonna do that on your own, or do you want to be involved with the bulk purchase for a discount?
Oh yeah, definitely want to. If we can get a discount, take
If we have an
advantage of it.
opportunity as a network to get a discount, we're gonna do it.
I believe that Brad's email had said we needed a minimum of 3. Is that right, Brad?
I'd have to go back and look at, but it sounded like that's what the guy was telling me, was there was price breaks that started at 3 or 4 units. But my understanding, and again, the revenue is going to be there to cover the cost of these. So we need to, and we're looking at even the agencies that aren't having issues with their Niton right now. There's going to be a resourcing problem for you at some point in the next 6 to 18 months. It's inevitable. So we need to start looking at making that move to the newer technology anyway.
Yeah, I have a verbal okay. I just need to get a written letter.
So if we set a deadline for the 14th, would that give everybody time to get that, and then I can put it together, and then that gives us time. We could then submit it to our purchasing board on Monday the 19th, and they can give us approval, so then we can send it on to the state and make contact and find out. So I wrote my plan at 24,000 because that was the price in there. And then I just had mentioned that if we were able to do multiple purchases, they would offer a discount depending on how many were there. And my board was okay with that, with the idea this was their, if we only did ours, it would be this much. And so.
Wes says he's planning on getting one as well. He's just waiting for approval from his board of directors.
Okay, and Angela had emailed me and said she was working on it on her side. So are we? And I can send an email out that says that on the, you know, on the 15th, whatever letters I have, or the 14th, whatever that next Wednesday is, that I'll send it forward and we'll move forward with it. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah, sounds good.
Coordinators. Lauren.
Works for me.
Yep, that'll work.
Okay, sounds good.
What coordinators come on?
I've got Jesse, Scott,
You doing one, Bragg?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah,
if
just
I-
one for us.
Angie, you online?
Go ahead.
Angie's not on today. She's won't be until a little later. I'm not sure how many she wants to do for us.
All right. Leapson,
Yeah, we're gonna need one.
Corey, Kyle, whoever's out there to the basin.
Yeah, we'll need one.
You're just thinking 1, 2, right, Wes?
Yeah, just one.
And same with you, Bolander, right?
Yes.
Fair enough. I'll talk to Angie later today. So we're looking at 5+. I'll start getting an idea what the real cost is going to be.
Okay.
And then you're going to do the 5K purchase request form.
Yes, so I have it started already. And then the one question that I did have, and I reached out to a couple of people, but do we need to do a disposal request for our other ones? What?
At some point, yes, but
And
you know what? We got to figure out how to dispose of those things
okay,
because
that
you know,
was my next question.
they
I
got
think
that little
I didn't
glow
know.
in the dark problem.
Right.
That's a good question.
I would recommend yours is the one that's the most deadest, but it's
Right.
going to be Thermo Fisher Scientific that tells us how we can dispose of it.
So
Right.
I reached out to them and they gave me an email to send a message to. So I have done that, but I have not heard back from them yet.
Fair enough.
Can we just drop in one of those things at Walmart where you can drop off your old cell phones? You know?
I think there's a place out in West Twilla County you can leave them too.
You got to take them to Yucca Mountain.
Take them over to that tree, you know, out there up I-80. I'm sure there's a bin out there. You just drop them.
All right. Thank you guys for
Fair
all
enough.
that you've done on that.
All right, we'll have some moving here in the next few days. Excellent.
Cool. So yeah,
All right,
back to the other thing.
back to the other thing that I was interrupted by somebody. Anyway, so like I said, I went to Minneapolis, DOE, Office Inspector General, some other people were there. Looking down the road, as you know, with the stimulus money, one of those things that is going to happen is a site visit by DOE as part of the first part of the money being released in production. One of the things that one of the values of going to conferences like this, there's what they tell you, and then there's what they kind of let you figure out on your own if you read between the lines. And one of the things that was a reoccurring comment is that statement of policy is your process. So case in point, 10 CFR 440, the regulation governing low-income weatherization assistance, is a whopping 22 pages long. Yet for some reason, the state of Utah, we have produced a guideline that's over 200 pages long. And that's because a lot of the guidance in 10 CFR 440 simply states the grantee shall have policy around. Example being section B9 is the energy auditing standards, right? That is our policy on how an audit is done. And a lot of those types of policy equaling process do exist in the guidelines. But at the same time, all 7 of those agencies out there, you all have slightly different ways where your business model, if you're like UCA, where you have different types of crews versus some of the smaller agencies where it's all in the pool, everybody does everything. At the end of the day, you all have internal processes that are not defined or covered in policy in the guidelines. I've talked about for years developing internal policy, written internal policy that would also serve as a mechanism to train individuals. You all need to start looking at being more serious about this, because we will start evaluating your documents in the coming future. So I want to just take this moment to let you know what's coming. So those of you that want to get ahead of the game, you can start working on this and start refining it. Those of you that want to wait for the letter to tell you to do it, we'll oblige. So there you go.
Question.
Everybody understand that? What I'm getting at? Silence is acceptance, right?
I hope so.
Do you mean like our policies and procedures that we have in-house that says like we do this, and then for further guidance refer to the state guidelines?
Sort of kind of the other way around. If there is something in state policy that derives or directs you on how to do something, there is no need for you all to have a policy in place, obviously. Take intake, for example. If you look at the intake section and see one of the guidelines, we don't cover your all's internal mechanics of who does what, how it gets done. Our required documentation is, it just simply states you will have these forms. You all have an internal process that determines how and who does what parts of intake. Likewise, we have auditing standards that explain what needs to be done at certain phases, but there are other things that do take place internally on how that work order gets generated, how the generated work order goes over to the crews, and so on down the line. When it comes to production, the guidelines are relatively silent. We have the field guide that explains what quality work should look like, but we don't tell you how to make the sausage. There are parts in that process that you all need. Warehousing and inventory. If you don't have written policies on how you're checking in, checking out, and managing your warehouse, that would be a problem. The guidelines don't tell you anything about that. That is something that you must do locally. That give you a better idea?
Yeah, thank you.
Crisis would be another example. How do you make the sausage? Sausage.
Awesome. Any other questions on that one? All right. It's been a month or 2 or 3 since a while ago we showed you guys
4 months ago.
AeroSeal. Yeah, the folks down in Richfield, they gave it a try on a house or 2. We feel like it's a good product. There's some good opportunities there. And then shortly after that, Brad reminded us all that that product was not on DOE's approved materials list. And so the guidance was, if you do it, use your LIHEAP money. Well, we did the paperwork and got, DOE gave us approval for it. So if you're using AeroSeal, and I think there's maybe another brand name out there that would probably fit within the same approval we got.
And yeah, when we wrote the approval, it's not a brand name. Just as I told you all in procurement, you can't specify brand name. It's aerosolized duct sealant.
Regu.
UL 20 or no. Oh hell, what was the damn UL number on that thing? 1780. UL 1780. So it has its own UL listing. Actually, even DOE it was a conversation in Minnesota where the head technical guy, Derek Schroeder, was talking, and he made a comment about Appendix A and CFR 440 on materials. And I started thinking about that in relation to AeroSeal. And I opened up my laptop and start searching, and sure enough, I initially thought AeroSeal and those types of duct sealants would all have fell under UL 181, which is the same as your mastic and other things like that. Well, no, UL created an entire new listing. Therefore, because UL 181 is approved, we were outside the approval process. And so actually our submission to DOE caused them to have to do an exception and a change to the SWS, as well as a few other things, because they had made the same incorrect assumption we had, that it was all UL listed 181. So it was kind of funny, the ripple that was created by one little comment at a conference. So
needless to say, we do have approval now. So if it's something that you are using and you have the SIR for it, you can use DOE's funds for it. And then as we were talking about that, I just wanted to put this on your radar for those of you who are using it or thinking about using it. We're just curious, as you learn, give us some feedback. Let us know what you're learning. One of the things that we're wondering about is how well does that work on duct that is already insulated. So if you're out there trying it, maybe pay a little bit of attention to that. We'd like some feedback. It'll probably help us as we move forward and start scoping some best practices and things like that.
And that was like the August technical meeting, September, July.
Probably August, yeah.
Yeah, if you want to go back and look at it was like an August, July technical meeting.
Yeah.
Is where Turner and Dalton, along with 6 County, covered lessons learned, best practices about that experience. Yeah. On those particular jobs, the duct was not already insulated. One of the conversations we've had around this is probably one of the biggest gains with this product would be duct work that's outside the envelope. But what was the approximate gap size where the goo had a problem filling?
I don't know. It's probably like over a 1/4 inch or something.
Yeah.
You do have some. If you do have some major holes and you cannot access them, then this may not work. Is probably the first assumption we made. On the one house that they were working on in Richfield, the crawl space had 48 inches or so to move around in. So halfway through the process, the guys spraying the stuff realized that the needle stopped moving, and they got down and found a couple of larger gaps, sealed them up, and then started things back up, and they were able to get everything really tight. Had they not been able to get down and address some of those things, I think it wouldn't have been a total failure, because they did get some pretty substantial reductions, but there's definitely a few things to watch for. It's not a one size fits all. But
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
1/2 inch for the gap size.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Daly.
Yep.
The one thing we're looking at, and so even though there's a good payback on the product when it's audited, there's not enough money in there to uninsulate ductwork outside the envelope, go through this AeroSeal process, and then re-insulate it. You're just not going to have a payback there. And so we're kind of curious, just like the old trick of putting mesh tape or whatever down on ductwork and then put mastic over it. What would that look like where you have insulated ductwork and you're still showing a good leakage? Running, we believe if you run it, you're going to see payback using the to do the AeroSeal. But would that insulation material in proximity to those leaks basically serve as that fibrous material that would allow the sealant to accumulate against, just like using the mesh tape on the big gaps on the ductwork? It would be interesting to see. It may be too viscous and it might not harden fast enough on the insulation. Who knows? But yeah, there's definitely good value in this product. So
Anybody have any feedback now or any questions or comments on that one? Okay. Next item I have is I just want to make everybody aware there was a couple little items that we updated on our resource page. I think for everything else on here, except for this last item, I've got a slide for her, so I'll click through those while I'm talking here. So these two updates were made to our resources page. A07, the health and safety form. We created a new health and safety form a few months back, and it took us a month or two to remember that we still had the old one linked on our resource page. So you can now access the new form on the resource page. And going forward, since that is a Google document, that should always be the latest and greatest version of that form. So if you're looking for it, it is on our resources page. The other thing that I noticed was a little off on our resources page we updated recently was there was a link on the SHPO forms that sent you in the wrong direction on the state's SHPO site. So that's been fixed. And I don't know if anybody else was looking for it, but I went looking a couple of times for a copy of the SHPO Appendix A, which is that list of weatherization measures that you can install without having to get a 106 review. So if you've been looking for that and haven't been able to find it, we put a copy of it back where it under the SHPO agreement link, along with our original agreement with the Navajo Nation, if anybody's ever looking for those. So those were a couple things on the resources page. And in the same vein, I wanted to just point out we've made some updates to these forms. And so they are all current and up to date. If you go to the resources page, you'll get the latest and greatest of each of these. The first one was the ASHRAE calculator. We noticed that there was a little bit of a error, or not really an error. I can't admit to an error, right? No, what it was, since it's my calculator and I made it, right? No, the calculator, what it was doing was, you know how you can hide some of the rows based on the number of bathrooms that you select? Well, it was, whether they were hidden or not, it was adding up all of the flow information about each fan. So I suspect what was, because I noticed it on a couple of audits and realized we had a problem. I suspect that on those audits that calculator was being reused on multiple jobs, and somebody had left old data on bathroom number 3 from a prior job, but then when they used it on the next job, it only had 2 bathrooms. The data from bathroom 3 was hidden, but it was still being added and included in their ASHRAE strategy. So even though you should not be doing that, I went in and fixed the formula so that if it is hidden, it won't add that to the ASHRAE strategy. So again, it's automatically on the calculator. With this and with all of these other documents that I'm going to talk about, if any of you are in the habit of, if you are not in the habit of going and grabbing a fresh copy of this every time you start a new job, please be aware of the risk that you run. Like, we try to fix these problems as quickly as we can. If you are grabbing a new copy every time, you will have the latest and greatest. I know some of you prefer to take some of these forms and put them into a different format, like a PDF or a Microsoft Excel. And I understand why you do that. Just make sure that you have a good habit of checking back on a very regular basis and making sure you are using the most current copy. That should be at least monthly, if not more frequent than that. But as a best practice, we recommend that you just grab a fresh copy every time. I have listed on, I think on every one of these documents, I've listed a revision date. So if you are one of those folks that you've converted this into a different format, you want to make sure that you've got the latest and greatest, take a look at the revision date on the document. We should be keeping that up to date every time we make changes. So that's the ASHRAE calculator. A07, that health and safety assessment, in addition to putting it on the resources page. In our October meeting, a couple of you guys made some really good suggestions on some edits to that. Those edits have been made. And then I had also had a few other things. So we went through and made sure it aligns better with our current guidelines, and some of the other stuff we talked about in that October meeting. So those were made a month and a half ago. If you have been grabbing a fresh copy, you've been using the most updated current version since then. A08 lead inspection report. So Zach helped us figure out we had a glitch on that report. It was the little wacky one. Brad,
Honestly,
I think
it was
Brad-
my monitoring
Brad might have
comment.
figured this one out too, yeah. Brad wrote Zach up on some stuff, and then Zach started scratching his head going, what the heck, what happened? Anyway, we had a glitch. There's when you get to select one of 4 or 5 options as the results of your lead inspection. And if you picked option number 2 and then you saved it, for some reason it was defaulting back to option number 1. So there was just a little bit of a mess with the JavaScript. We fixed it, and so hopefully, well, so again, just a great example of why it's important now to grab a fresh copy so that you're not using the old one that could cause a problem where you'll get written up on a monitoring. And then the 4th one is CO3, the QCI form. We've made a couple of changes to that one. I'm going to jump into this form so we can take a look at it, since this one I feel like is still evolving a little bit. But I forgot to pull it up, so give me just 2 seconds here. The biggest change, well, there's 2 big changes to the form. One of them is that the section on the audit file review, when Dalton put this together, he tried to summarize a lot of of the items that I check on. And he was able to kind of whittle my list of 50 something items down to like 23 or 24. But as I've gone out and been monitoring, I'm noticing that QCIs are missing a lot of those items that were summarized. And then it was also pointed out that it may be helpful if you guys just had my complete monitoring list right here on your QCI form. So that's what we did. The audit section is now twice as large as it used to be, but it is an exact copy of my monitoring tool. So if, as a QCI, if you are checking on all of these things, then when I come along and monitor those things, you should be just fine. If you're going through this list and you do not understand it very well and have questions, hit up our YouTube channel. We did a meeting about a year or so ago on how to do an audit file review. So if you'll just search for audit file review, you'll find that meeting. And if you still have questions after that, give me a call. So that's the first big change. The second big change was that we had a section, and we got some good feedback from you guys. It started to feel like a duplication of work, where it was kind of a carbon copy of what you have in your job cost by measure report or your client completion report. You have the option of using either one of those. The goal of both of those reports is that we're documenting the actual cost of each measure, and we're showing that the actual cost of each measure was within the cost limits or it had an SIR. And we originally put it on here wanting to make sure that the QCIs would go through and double check and make sure that every measure was within the SIR or was paid for with an appropriate funding source. As we saw what was coming through in monitoring, we realized it's a duplication of work. So we took it back out, but know that section is gone now, but that does not mean that you're not checking it. Right now, the check for it is up here in the audit section. It's AO2-3. And the question is, are each measure and package of measures cost effective per B92 and all these other references? And then in red, as a reminder, is the job cost by measure report, or if you're using a client completion report, that works too. Is it complete? Is including the funding source, the estimate and actual cost of each measure? And back to the original question, are each measures cost effective? If it's an ECM, is it within the SIR? If it's an IRM, is the cumulative cost within the SIR? If it's an HSM, is it within the cost limits, or do you have written approval? So those are the things you need to be double checking as a QCI. Those were the major changes to the QCI form. Any questions on those? And we are, you know, as you are using those forms, if it's causing you problems or if you have suggestions, take a minute and write a few things down, send them to me in an email, send them to Rogers, because we expect that this form will continue to evolve for a little while until we get something that really works well for everybody. So had a couple of items of guideline updates. These have been submitted, and the changes have been made in our working guidelines. They have not been published yet. So I'm telling you about them now. If you will implement them now, then when our next version of our guidelines is published, you'll already be in compliance.
First of the year.
And yeah, it'll be first of the year because Brad has been we've had to make a few other changes to align with the new grant. So we will be doing that published soon. But anyway, so the first one I wanted to point out, and when we publish it, there will be a program notice that will have a list of all the changes that was made. These are just a couple of highlights I want to make sure everybody's aware of. First one was on work orders. I have been watching work orders more closely on my monitoring because I feel like this is an opportunity for our program to improve. I think that there is probably a lot of communication and a lot of extra phone calls and things like that that could be eliminated by putting some of this information on the work order right at the beginning of the process. The intent of this change has always been in our guidance, but as I was looking at some of the monitoring results this year and kind of wondering how we could make improvements here, I went back and read the section and realized that the intent was there, but we never expressly said, you must do this. So I went back and expressly said, you must do this. And this is what it says. All weatherization work shall be directed, make it a little bigger, by a written work order. This may be a hard copy or electronic format. And then this is the part, and the intent's always been there, because if you read the whole section, it talks about getting the right person in the right place with the right materials to do their job correctly. So this new part just says work orders shall include a scope of work that describes what work is to be performed for each measure, including any details that are unique or specific to the measure. So your work orders really need to have a little more detail to show kind of an extreme example of this. To make the point, if you were an auditor and you went into a house and you noticed that the house needed 2 smoke alarms, and you noticed that it needed one in the downstairs hall because there just wasn't one there, and you noticed that upstairs in bedroom number 2, you need to replace the old one because it's not working, those details on the work order should be written so that the work gets done properly. Just making a note to say install new smoke detector in downstairs hall and replace smoke detector in bedroom 2 is all you need to add to the work order. But those details are details that as an auditor you've already figured out, and you just need to communicate that in writing so that that doesn't get lost in the shuffle.
The cop-out of writing install per field guide is not going to continue to fly. The field guide establishes what quality work looks like, what it should look like when it's done, and the methods of how it's supposed to be installed. That is not what's expected to be on the field guide, or excuse me, the work order. What is expected to be on a work order is the information of where the work is supposed to be installed and other things along those natures. So if that that work order is lacking that kind of direction, you're going to probably hear about it.
Any questions on that one?
I have a question. So a while back, we got an email that said that you didn't just want them to be more specific, but you wanted our UL numbers and the materials to be used on the work order. Is that still the case, or is the material list that supports the work order valid.
Will you restate that? It was a little choppy and I'm a little unclear on the question.
So in the spring, we got an email about work orders being more specific and more detailed. And one of the things listed on there was that you guys were wanting us to start using the UL for materials that were going to be used on each measure.
I am not, I would say no, the UL is not, that's not something that would be required for each measure on a work order. I've always felt the work order is the way you guys communicate internally. What we're finding though is that there's a lot of verbal communication and less written communication internally happening. And on most of the time things run through smoothly and there's no questions and no concerns, but when there are concerns, that's when we go back and go, oh, I wish we would have written some of that down better. So we'd like you guys to get into a better practice of that. But no, the detail of the materials listings and things like that is not needed on a work order.
No, that type of information should be covered either A, in the procurement process. You should only be buying materials that meet those specifications. You're looking at, so if it's anything that you're carrying in the warehouse, your procurement process for the warehouse should cover those specifications.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not sure what email. I mean,
yeah, if you find something and want to send it back our way,
I'm kind of curious what that email was. That doesn't ring a bell with me, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Yeah, but again, like I said, it's a two-part proposition. The work order should direct where the work should be done and any specifics about how to effectively do the work. The field guide tells you what should be done when installing these things and what quality work looks like when it's done. So it's a two-part lift there, and where we keep finding the weaknesses on the work order in providing that specific direction on where the work should be done, what that is trying to accomplish. That information on what the work order or the auditor is specifying this measure to be put in this place, sometimes providing that information of kind of that strategy, right? Especially when you come into air sealing and some of these other things, is what is it you're trying to accomplish here? Where is the bypass? Where's the leakage coming from? And then another thing that some of you have heard and others of you will start probably hearing a little bit about is what is that internal process? Oh, wait a minute. There should probably be a written policy on how is the agency preparing the crew to do the work, where their auditor is briefing the job to the crew, or how that's being done as well too. Because we're finding in some cases you're writing a very poor work order, you're handing it to the crew, and then you get the results that we find in the field during monitoring. And so if you're struggling to effectively create good work orders, maybe one of the alternatives to shore that up is a process that your auditors are briefing in a production meeting prior to work starting, how this job was viewed by the auditor to help better explain what the expectations are. That's a practice that some of you have used, and we've recommended to others that you could use as well.
Any other questions on that one?
Pictures.
Well, you're exactly right, Zach, and that's kind of the point. Turner has beaten all the auditors into submission. Oh, excuse me. Turner has trained the auditors very well. I forgot. It's a government meeting.
We have awesome auditors that like to do.
And so there are an outrageous amount, well, maybe not outrageous, but there's an abundance of pictures out there. And it was something I pointed to earlier in the year when we redid the deferral letter and template. And one of the things I pointed out is for all these years, we've sent deferral letters where we poorly explained what was expected of the client. And that question I asked when I was looking at redoing that entire deferral process, communication to the client was, why don't we take advantage of all of these pictures that the auditors are accumulating during their site visit? And this is a great example of, you know, work orders that have 0 pictures. You have this amazing cache of pictures that the auditors accumulated, and then you write some lame install per field guide as the work order comment. And it's like, well, yeah, no wonder the work didn't get installed the way it should have been or where it should have been, because you gave 0 direction. So that is a great point to bring up, Zach, actually.
Yeah.
Take advantage of the pictures you've already used and put them into the work order. It can be done.
Well, and then from a QCI perspective, if there's clear instructions on what was supposed to be done, it really helps them to be able to make a better determination on whether it was done accurately.
Exactly. The one person that should be advocating this the most is the QCI, because it makes your job that much easier, because you have clear expectations that were presented to the crew that you can measure that work against.
All right, next item was just the site sketch in the guidelines is now required. If you've attended my Energy Audit 101 class in the last couple of years, I told you that it's required. We've talked about it, but there were actually 4 or 5 different places in the guidelines where it was still saying it was as a best practice. So when the guidelines are published this next time, it will now say that the site sketch shall be drawn for every house, or, you know, drawn of the thermal boundary for each dwelling. The site sketch shall include all exterior walls, windows, doors, attics, foundations on the thermal boundary. The sketch shall be drawn to scale, shall include dimensions of exterior walls and the direction or orientation of the dwelling. Each wall, window, door, attic, and foundation shall be labeled. Labeling shall correspond with its respective component in the energy audit. So I feel like our energy auditors are doing a really good job of that. If any of you are missing any of those, I've made that information available to you on your monitoring reports. You know, I feel like there's a little area here and there we can definitely improve on, but across the board, everybody's putting a site sketch in every file. Just an FYI, now the guidelines make it official that that is required. And then the last guideline change was the assumption has always been there, but we had an instance where we realized I probably need to go back and actually put it in the guidelines. If you install a new duct system, whether it's a crisis or a weatherization measure, you should be installing that new duct system to our duct tightness standard. And now the guidelines require it. So any questions on that one? And I guess just to be very clear on it, new ductwork shall be tested by the QCI. So I think where that would get missed is on a crisis measure. Make sure that on a crisis measure, if you have had a new ductwork installed, that you are measuring its leakiness and recording whether or not it was installed to our standard. I think we would do a good job on our weatherization, but it might get missed on a crisis. So, and our standard is 2 Pascal at 50 if you're measuring it with a pressure pan, or we currently have our standard at 8 CFM at 25. You get 8 CFM of leakage per 100 square feet of conditioned floor area if you're measuring at 25 Pascals with a duct blaster test. So anyway, the last item I had on my list of new things was just the new audit plan. And the new audit plan is not very well developed. The new audit is out. We plan to get it implemented probably within we're shooting for July 1 of next year, I think.
Sure.
As long as everything's working well. I'm shooting for July 1 of next year that our program will be implementing it.
Yeah, July 1 is what I heard.
Yeah, to make that official, I have to send some documentation to DOE and stuff, but before we can do that, we got to get everybody up to speed. I will be I'll start that work in January, February. I'll probably reach out to coordinators and just ask you to identify one auditor that we can start the process with, and we'll start learning together. That's as much of the plan that's been developed so far. So, any questions on that one? All right. ASHRAE. I had 3 or 4 things I wanted to talk about ASHRAE. There was really one thing on ASHRAE that I wanted to make sure and talk about. And so I'm just going to skip to that since we have 5 minutes left. What I noticed with ASHRAE is that we haven't trained on it for a few years, and we have some newer folks in the program. And so it's probably time for us to provide some training. In the notes for today's meeting, I'm going to include a link to some YouTube videos. There's a guy, I can't remember where he's from. He's been in the Weatherization Network for a while. He put together some really good videos. They're all on ASHRAE 62.2.13. There were only a couple tiny little changes when we went from 13 to 16. So everything I've found in his videos so far is accurate. That is the standard. So if you would like some good training on ASHRAE 62.2, I'll include the link. Make sure you take the time and watch it. They're like 9 videos, but they're all 5 or 6 minutes long. And he does a fantastic job of teaching ASHRAE. You'll be very well equipped if you'll take the time to watch those videos. But this is the one thing I wanted to address. And I wanted to address it because I've seen it in 2 different locations in recent monitoring. So it tells me there's a little bit of misunderstanding about what's going on. So here's the question. Can an existing exhaust fan be used for whole building ventilation? What do you guys think? False.
Only if it meets ASHRAE spec.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Means the zone rating, CFM, stuff like that, vented to the outside.
Yeah, anybody else? Oh, Scott, you're exactly right. And that I think that was probably the piece of information that may be missing in the couple of situations I ran into. So the ASHRAE standard, in addition to telling us how much ventilation is required, they've also specified that the fans that we use have to be quiet, so people will leave them on. And their specification is if we're using a fan for whole building ventilation, that fan shall be rated for a sound at a maximum of 1 SOM at whatever level you're setting that fan at. So if you put in a fan and you plan on turning it up to 200 CFM, at 200 CFM, it has to be rated to be no louder than 1 SOM. And we don't turn them up that high, but sometimes when we get close to 100, they start getting noisy. You have to make sure that they are rated to be 1 SOM or less at whatever level you are setting them at. This hasn't come up a ton because we found a couple of products that work great, and that's usually what we see out there in the field. But Scott, you are right. If you found an existing fan and you could show that that fan was rated for that zone rating and it met the other ventilation requirements that you needed it to, you could use an existing exhaust fan to meet or for your whole building ventilation. And I do think that we are getting into newer and newer homes, and from time to time you might actually find a manufacturer's name and a manufacturer's model number on a fan. And if you can go and find the documentation for that model number and put that documentation in the client file to show that it met the zone rating, then yes, you could use that fan. If you cannot, you need to replace that fan with one that meets the zone rating.
Well, meets the zone rating and is installed to program standards.
Yes, thank you. And you'll notice on my screen here, on my slide, I've got a picture of decibels. decibels is something you could measure on site. You could put a decibel meter up there and see how loud it is. But the standard says sones, and the way that you measure sones, I don't completely understand it, but it has to be done in a lab setting. It's not a field test we can do. So you would have to go find the manufacturer's information and show, you know, where they've documented that they had it lab tested it and it met the zone rating. In that same vein, when it comes to local exhaust fans, so just a regular bath fan, it's not being used as your whole building ventilation, just to exhaust either a kitchen or a bathroom. Those fans shall be rated at a sound maximum of 3 zones or less. This is important to us for a couple of reasons. One of them, so when the weatherization program approached the ASHRAE committee and said, hey, could we apply your standard to the homes that we're weatherizing? You know, ASHRAE probably said something like, well, it's designed for new homes, and part of our standard says you have to have these local exhaust fans in all these rooms. Well, they worked together and they came up with the Appendix A, which allows us to figure out if there's a local exhaust deficit. And as part of that, they said, if there's an existing local exhaust fan, then you don't have to worry about this 3 zone thing. But we have learned that in some situations, a good ASHRAE strategy requires us or involves us replacing a local exhaust fan that isn't moving much air with a local exhaust fan that is moving some air. That new local exhaust fan that we install must be rated at 3 zones or less. And be careful with this. I ran into this a couple of years ago. An agency had found a really nice exhaust fan that worked well in a mobile home installation, and the box said that it met the ASHRAE 62.2 standard. And they had installed it as a whole building ventilation fan. And when we dug into it, what the language on the box was saying was that it met the 3 zone standard and it could be installed as a local exhaust fan. It did not meet the 1 zone standard where it could be installed as a whole building ventilation fan. So make sure you guys understand the difference on that when you're selecting your equipment. And if you ever run into any situations where you think, hey, could we leave this local exhaust fan in there? Like Bolander pointed out, if you can show that there's documentation that this is within the zone rating and it meets our program standards, then yes, it could be used. But if it does not, then you need to swap it out with one that does. Any questions on that?
Hey, Turner, how much are decibel meters?
You can actually, there's apps on your phone you
Yeah.
can get them going. They're somewhat accurate. You could probably pick up a decibel meter for under $100, but
All right. I just looked, 1 zone is equal to 28 decibels.
that's the problem with it is it's not linear. And it's been a while since I looked, because I was wondering the same thing. Could we just do a field test and say it's okay? And the research that I found, the answer was no. So if you guys do your own homework and find something different, let me know. But when I spent a few hours on it a couple of years ago, and I walked away with the answer of no, it has to be, as their standard says, it actually has to be rated for sound at a maximum of 1 zone. So anyway, other questions? Cool. Well, let's go ahead and end. Thank you guys so much.
One more thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just a thought or idea on like how to maybe more easily pull forms off of the website that are up to date?
Yeah.
Part of the hassle with it is going through each section and the whole list of forms and downloading each one individually. Is there a possible way to have them put in like a folder, like an intake, production, audit, closeout folder? That way we're just downloading a folder or something that has all the updated forms.
Yeah, it's something I've had simmering on the back burner for a while. I appreciate you bringing it up. I'll see if we can prioritize that a little bit and make something more useful for you guys. Any other comments or questions? All right. Again, thank you guys so much for all that you're doing. We really appreciate it. Hope you guys have an awesome Christmas and holiday season, and be safe.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you.